We're going to count to 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I want everybody to take a guess as to how long it will take us to count to 1 billion. A billion years? Okay. 30 years? Okay. It will take you 37 and a half years just to count to 1 billion. Okay? So can you imagine how long 1 billion years might look like? A lot of time, right? 13 billion years ago, the universe exploded into existence. 4 billion years ago, our sun came into existence. Or, I'm sorry, 4.5 billion years ago. And 4 billion years ago, Earth came into existence. And as she was born, she was hot, she was struck by meteors, she spun around the sun, and eventually established a safe enough distance to start to cool. And as she cooled, she released gases that formed our atmosphere. It was in this climate that the first signs of life actually began. Now, if we were to chart this out on a scale as posited by Carl Sagan, this is what it looks like. Okay? Now, human existence showed up in that tiny little dot, all the way from hunter-gatherers up to the modern society that we know today. Okay? It took millions of years for Earth to form. Its continents broke apart. It established many evolutionary processes and established Earth's intricate balance and interconnectedness between Earth's systems. Now, there are 9 limits to Earth's systems. We call these the 9 planetary boundaries, okay? 4 of which we have crossed, okay? The ones that we have crossed include climate change, which is that we have emitted such a heinous amount of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere that we are trapping so much heat that you have changed your weather patterns, you have melted your glaciers to a point that the sea currents have also changed and you have changed your climate, right? 2, your biochemical flow. Now, the biochemical flow is the exchange of energy between microorganisms, right? So it's all the way down from the exchange of energy from the sunlight down to the animal that dies. That's your biochemical exchange. We have polluted our biochemical flow to such an extent that we have caused an imbalance. We have caused urbanization that causes deforestation that has also caused a further imbalance. Water pollution. We all know that Earth is 70% water, but actually only 4% is fresh water. Of that 4%, we only have access to 1%. Why? Because it is either locked in glaciers or is in the form of water vapor. We have successfully polluted that entire 1% of fresh water. Another boundary that we have crossed. Lastly, biodiversity loss. Every day, we could be losing between 10 or 100,000 species because we still have not even scraped the surface of discoveries as far as animals and plants biodiversity goes. So in essence, humans have actually rendered themselves a geological force that has triggered the 6th mass extinction, the last one being the dinosaurs. We are as bad as the meteor that struck Earth and wiped out an entire generation of dinosaurs. That is how bad humans are. And in that tiny little dot of time, in the last second of the last day in the cosmic calendar, humans have annihilated billions of years of evolution. I think it's time to take another deep breath because it's a lot to take in. functions in wholes and not parts. The interconnectedness between all of Earth's systems is very, very crucial. So when we say nature functions in wholes, we mean that the climate is what determines your weather and your precipitation patterns, that then determines your ecosystem functionality. Your ecosystem is dependent on the exchange between biodiversity and the biochemical flow. The biochemical flow is sustained by biodiversity, and the biodiversity is sustained by the biochemical flow. In turn, water is determined by the climate, and the water is what determines the biochemical flow and also sustains your biodiversity. So it's all interconnected, and I'll explain a little bit further as we go forward. So nature functions in wholes, not parts. So what if I was to tell you that if nature is to function as a whole, and we could think about climate as a whole, it's a very whole problem to resolve. And if we were to turn to the billions of years of evolution, if we were to look to nature, there is one very simple solution. And that one is right beneath your feet. Soil is a living miracle. Okay? In one handful of soil, there are more microorganisms than there are humans on Earth. Soil actually regulates the climate, it sustains biodiversity, it stores water, and it ensures a balanced biochemical flow. Now, how does it do that is the question. Okay. So, we all know what photosynthesis is, basics of class 1, I guess. Plants absorb carbon from the atmosphere in order to photosynthesize, in order to create carbohydrates for themselves. As they do that, they penetrate that carbon into the soil. The soil has these microorganisms that then feed on that carbon and then creates more nutrients for the soil, namely nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, each plant also takes in as much nutrient as it needs, like humans do, and also adds more nutrients, right? These nutrients in turn feed a fungal network as well. That fungus network creates its own roots and connects with the roots of plants, which creates a very thick network. Those fungal networks actually enable your plants to create phone calls between other plants. They're actually able to upload and download data. They're actually able to exchange more nutrients with other plants. They can send information to other plants about the presence of predators or diseases so that the plants on the other side can make whatever sort of protection against that. When plants are able to do that, they're able to sustain a network that goes far and wide. Now, because the soil is doing well, they're also feeding the biodiversity of plants, which then in turn feeds the biodiversity on land. Now, as your different species are walking and trampling and excreting, they're adding more organic matter. Now, as they trample along the soil, they're also tilling it, right? As they're tilling it, they're adding more organic matter. This organic matter is now enabling the soil itself to draw down carbon. For every 0.5% carbon that is absorbed into the soil, you are storing 150,000 liters of water per hectare, which means the plants have enough water to sustain themselves during a drought. Right? So soil has enabled that. As the biodiversity is walking around on land, they're also pollinating and spreading those plants. Now maybe you're thinking about pests and diseases. How do they protect themselves? For every one pest, there are 1,700 different indifferent or protective species. Not to mention that now the soil is healthier, the plants are healthier, and your animals are healthier, so there's greater immunity against diseases, right? The soil is now also storing a lot of water, so there's a lot of infiltration, right? And it is also now drawing down all the carbon and regulating it between the soil and the atmosphere. And so this has created a holistic, connected network. This is how billions of years of evolution has caused life to exist. What have we done? Humans actually think of themselves as separate to nature. So we have actually gone and built factories because we want to take our fossil fuels to create energy, and so we have emitted or burned a lot of that fossil fuel and emitted all the carbon into the atmosphere. We have gone to forests and ecosystems and ripped out all the plants. As we know, plants absorb carbon, and as they absorb carbon, they store it. Every time you chop a tree, the entire carbon stock is released into the atmosphere. When you till the soil, you are also releasing all its carbon stock and releasing it into the atmosphere. You've done that, and then you've created hectares of land. Okay, you have removed that entire web of the network that used to sustain that entire life and also provide nutrients and information to one another. And you have also desecrated the entire microorganisms there. You planted one plant that is draining the soil of one particular nutrient, and you're now needing more pesticides and fertilizers because the soil is not healthy and the plant's not healthy. So you start building more factories and desecrated more ecosystems, and so the cycle keeps continuing. You have removed carbon where it originally was, in the soil. It is the building block of all matter. You are made of carbon, I am made of carbon, the soil is made of carbon, it is in everything. When you set something aflame and you see the black smoke, that is carbon. We need to put it back to where it belongs. We're going to ask ourselves how. So, 70% of Pakistan is actually dry lands. That means it is at a risk of desertification, right? In 2014, the UN actually did a study that said there are only 60 harvests left globally if we continue with the consistent soil regeneration that we have. So as of now, we only have 51 harvests left globally if we continue in the manner that we have been. So the solution is to now go back to regenerative organic farming. So we're taking the principles that we talked about in nature and applying it into our farming methods. 22% of Pakistan is actually cultivated. Why are we not using those billions of years of evolution and just putting that into the system versus coming up with complicated technologies and systems? So regenerative organic farming means planting plants and a number of them and only using compost. No pesticides, no fertilizers. You're just pumping what is natural into the soil, right? You're adding through cover crop different kinds of plants, and in doing so, you're creating double productivity because you may be planting rice, you may be planting fruit, you may be planting vegetables, and they are all contributing to the soil as well and giving you more fruit to bear, right? Cover cropping also benefits the soil because not only is it creating that vast network that holds the soil together, but you have created a layer that protects the soil from wind and rain erosion, right? I'm sure you've heard of interception. That is so crucial for the soil because it's protecting that top layer. The minute you expose it, as we do through monoculture, you have increased its risk of erosion and surface runoff, which is why we've experienced the floods that we have this year or last year. Holistic livestock management. So you're actually using the herds and livestock that you have, putting them in paddocks, getting them to graze the land, and as they do, they're excreting, they're tilling the soil, they're walking over it, and they're adding to organic matter. You simply remove them from this paddock to the next. You have left this area for rest. You've given the soil the ability to recuperate and become healthier. And in doing so, your plants are healthier, you double your productivity, and you have also you're humanely working with the animals, right? So what have we essentially done through this method? One, you have doubled your productivity. You're getting more more fruit or reaping your reward. You have not invested much in, you haven't put in much capital, and in doing that, you have not added too much investment. When you do that, you have actually doubled your profits. And when you double your profits, you have done something like alleviate poverty, and you'll be able to discuss that in the SDGs segment. So you've alleviated poverty, you have increased nutritional value of your food because you have done work with healthy soil. So you now have a healthier population. You have increased the ability of the land to absorb water, which means you're not dependent on the heavy irrigation system. In Pakistan, you used to find water up to 20 feet. It's now gone down to 800 feet. You want to be able to sustain your crop without having to rely too much on heavy irrigation and actually use that water to people who really need it, right? So you have now stored water. You have also now humanely started producing meat. You're not treating animals terribly. They're not trapped in manufacturing mills. They're not contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So you have now humanely started producing meat and you're not contributing to climate change either. Apart from that, you have now started drawing down actively carbon from the atmosphere. You are now starting to mitigate and adapt to climate change. And you are now resolving this issue. Great. There are certain organizations that have put this into practice and have actually done this research. So this is tried and tested. You have Combating Poverty and Climate Change Foundation that did this in Pakistan, and they recreated reports. The person who actually did this research was Alan Savory, so the Savory Hub is doing this. And the French government has started an initiative called 4 parts per thousand, which has actually committed to drawing down 0.4% of carbon every year into the soil. If we commit, and if enough countries admit and band together commit, they will be able to resolve this issue entirely. We will be able to bring Earth back to her original form. Climate change is overwhelming, but there is hope. Thank you.